On Life and Meaning is brought to you by Blumenthal Performing Arts, celebrating its 25th year presenting the best in the performing arts, sharing and employing the arts as a major catalyst to strengthen education, building community cohesiveness, and advancing economic growth. Further support is provided by Foundation for the Carolinas, inspiring philanthropy and empowering individuals to create a better community. And by the Arts and Science Council, Charlotte-Mecklenburg's resource hub and lead advocate for the regional cultural community, providing culture for all.
It means to me how I feel I should live my life. So I said something earlier about context matters. So that's the historic part. So you really have to know where you came from and where the people around you came from. And I try to show up and do my best in the everyday world. And I want to make sure the things I do now take into account what I'm leaving for the future. For the citizens of this community, for my son and my grandchildren. But I think part of it is doing the best you can to help people be able to live their best life now. So that's sort of how I live my life.
Cyndee Patterson is president of the Lynwood Foundation that owns and operates the historic Duke Mansion and the Lee Institute. Both the Duke Mansion and the Lee Institute are devoted to community service, philanthropy, and convening the civic leaders of today and tomorrow. The Duke Mansion is an inn and meeting event venue. The Lee Institute provides facilitation, consulting, and training for nonprofit, government, and community organizations across the country. Cyndee was previously president of Patterson Blake, a corporate meeting and event planning firm. She served as an at-large Charlotte City Council member from 1985 to 1993 and as Mayor Pro Tem from 1989 to 1991. She has served on several boards and has won numerous awards for community service. In this episode, we explore civic engagement, leadership development, city politics, converting to Reform Judaism, and serving the past, present, and future. I'm Mark Paris, and this is On Life and Meaning. Cyndee, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Cyndee, how do you describe the organization you lead?
Well, I lead a multifaceted organization. So we're the Lynwood Foundation. And under that is the Duke Mansion and the Lee Institute, all under one nonprofit. And I think of it this way. I think of the Duke Mansion representing the history of leadership in this community because of who lived there. If you look back at the list of owners, they truly left their footprints all over the community. And when you look at the Lee Institute, we're about building community today. So we represent the past and the potential of the future, particularly around leadership and building community.
The Duke Mansion and the Lee Institute together, what is the mission and vision of the organization?
It's really how do we honor our past, use it as context. Context does matter. And to build the future for this community so that there will always be people who own it, want to carry it, want to see it better, and want to envision a better spot for the whole of the community.
And how does the Lee Institute go about that work?
Well, we have sort of three ways we do that. We have leadership training programs. One's called American Leadership Forum. That's a 9-month program for leaders from across the region, 12, 13 county areas. And it's really about how do you lead in community. We all sort of know or have watched or seen how you lead in organizations. And while that's changing, community leadership is very different. You can't get the right people necessarily to come in the room that need to be in the discussion if they don't want to. You can't get people to necessarily go where you want to go if they're not in agreement. So community leadership is a very different style of leadership. We also have a program called Leading for Change, which is like how do you lead around race and justice in our community. And then we do a lot of work for nonprofit organizations. We do strategic planning, executive coaching, strategic direction, some fundraising consulting, we really try to help nonprofits be stronger. Our belief system is if you believe that community change creates better, stronger communities, then nonprofits are the underpinning of that. So we really work to be helpful to them in a consulting manner. And last but not least, we do civic engagement. So we design, facilitate, hold the container for groups to come together either in small sections of town or in small issues or large issues or large sections of town across the spectrum of people that are engaged in a specific community challenge, issue, opportunity. And making sure that the people that we're talking about are in the room is a pretty critical piece of what we do.
Cyndee, you mentioned leadership development, nonprofit organization support, and also civic engagement. Is there something that the Lee Institute teaches that crosses all those programs and services?
Yes. I think the most important thing we teach is dialogue and the difference between dialogue, discussion, and debate. Part of that dialogue training is helping people understand how to stay in the conversation, how to ask a lot of questions before you make a lot of comments. We try to help people not reload. Reload meaning, while the other person's talking, you're already figuring out what you're going to say as a retort. Listening is a critical piece of dialogue. It sounds when you say dialogue that you're talking about talking, but actually you're talking about listening. So that crosses everything we do in every way, and it is probably the most underdeveloped muscle in America.
At the heart of listening is a skill called appreciative inquiry. Mm-hmm. What is appreciative inquiry?
It is the ability to ask questions, to seek to understand kind of questions, to ask them from a point of appreciating the other person's place. We all know the difference between a question that sounds like, listen, dummy, here's my question, and really curious questions. Appreciative questions are curious. They seek to understand. They look for deeper meaning. They look to find the commonality that might be in what you said that I'm not quite sure about between you and I. You know, it's I have this theory that I've had forever that all people are the same. They wake up every morning and they care about their mothers, their children, their families, making sure they can put food on the table. And as you know, I have a core exercise drill I like to do that usually can get a room within about 5 minutes to sharing 3 core values in their top 5. And the whole room will have the same 3, or the majority. I would say 85, 90%. And the point of that is to say, we're not really different. We may come at it a different way, but what we want in the end is a very small basket of things that matter to all of us. And if you can get people there and they can find in their dialogue and listening and talking their connectivity on those, then when you go up to the things that are prickly, hard, we're not in alignment on, you can draw from the reserve that you've built by being respectful and interested and actually being open to hearing the conversation.
Does dialogue include discussion and debate?
It can, absolutely. We like to think you hold that until you have a sense of each other that can allow that to happen and walk away, not mad, not going, he's an idiot or she's an idiot, that you can even do that respectfully. You should be able to do that respectfully. And in my life, I've had lots of those conversations with people that were incredibly different than me and walked away okay with it.
There's a common complaint that we spend a lot of time in dialogue, in discussion, appreciating each other and not getting much done.
You know, I've read some of the op-ed pieces over the last year and the retorts back and forth about task forces and things, which is at the heart of that. Here's my thought, is we too frequently in America want to move to action. Until you're really certain you've got the parameters of the problem clear, that you know and you've asked the kinds of questions like, well, what does this really mean for us as an organization, as a community? And you've gone to that depth to really look at it, you can't begin designing outcomes. And so there's some work that I do around generative thinking and adaptive leadership, which says if you get people together and you really ask more questions from the beginning and take the time to do the research, the understanding, talk to the people that are on the ground, it takes longer to do that work. And it feels to people like we never get anywhere. What I would say we fail on in Charlotte is we get to some stack of recommendations. There's nobody's name next to the individual pieces of that. It might get handed to a committee. It might get handed to a government. It might get handed to an organization. And what's the report back mechanism? This is not different than dashboards inside organizations. And if you're not willing to do that, then don't call the meeting to start with. That's hard because a lot of the talk we do in Charlotte is around systemic issues. Systemic issues don't usually have one home. There's not usually somebody, and we don't want those somebodies like we used to have in the 80s where you had 5 or 6 corporate CEOs who could actually make something happen just by their sheer will and their dollars. That's not what we have now, and we don't really want that. But in the absence of that, where does ownership get placed on systemic issues that include 10 or more places in the community that you'd have to plug something?
Cyndee, what civic engagement issues are you working on?
We're currently working on gentrification. It's just starting. We have a little grant to start working on it. And the reason is that we're losing land. We're losing land, and in this state so far, we don't have good mechanisms to keep people in their homes when their property values become so high that there's like a gold mine at the end of selling that, and or property taxes continue to rise and they can't manage the increased value cost staying in their home. So neighborhoods that are traditionally minority neighborhoods, economically less advantaged neighborhoods, but in which there's home ownership, are starting to roll over into more gentrified neighborhoods. I don't want to say that's a bad thing, but it's not all good either because the displacement causes the fracturing of some of the structure that holds people and family and place and neighborhoods together, where your church is, where your school is, where your aunt lives. When we talk in Charlotte about what happened with Brooklyn, in a way, these are mini Brooklyns. And there isn't a place to take those dollars and move to that keeps you in proximity to your life cycle of things and places and people. So we've been working with a group on the west side around this. We have a grant from Re-Emprise to pull more pieces together. And I think what we're going to end up with is people coming together to talk about what can we do? How can we find ways to preserve land? How can we support people in place? I don't know what the answers are. There's great thinking across the country. There are places that are doing some things. They have more flexibility to do things, perhaps, than we have in North Carolina. But what are those things? So we're just starting down that path. And I feel like we almost can't run fast enough to engage people. People are in one-off groups talking about it, but how do we get people from across the community, east side, west side, north side, south side, to really come together and say, okay, here are the issues we all are facing around this. It might look a little different on the east side than it does on the north side, but how do we share best practice, figure out, and how do we help government be in that dialogue as well? And they are. But again, I think we're all kind of struggling with how to do that. So that's a piece that I'm pretty excited about that we're just beginning on. And again, we're not, as you know, we are not content specialists. We are process people. And so we'll go find content specialists, but we want to help people design a process and be together and really do some thinking about this and see again who at the end can own the pieces that would need to be owned to make a difference here. I drive through neighborhoods that I've known all my life, and they're looking really different to me.
Over the 2 decades of the Lee Institute's work, it has facilitated a whole number of civic engagement issues, from school board issues to racial inequity issues to neighborhood gentrification issues. Is there a common pattern that you see in these issues as they arise?
That's an interesting question. So I think there are 2 things that jump in my mind right away. One is because of the sheer growth in Charlotte, things that were probably always issues, but weren't kind of causing bumps in the road, so to speak. And, Charlotte likes clean streets and everything laid out. They don't want to know where they're going and how they're getting there. The messy part of it is hard for Charlotte. It always has been. So what we're finding now is just because of the amount of growth, the sheer number of people, things, schools, all of that is creating these little bubble ups. And some of them aren't little. Some of them are damn big. And the world itself, our inability to talk with one another, to make the space and time, and that is a national issue. We're all running pretty hard. Many of us working lots and families, and we've more and more siloed in our neighborhoods and our churches and less touch of the broader community. So I think when something starts bubbling up, it isn't as easy to figure out who to call and who owns it, where do we solve it, how do we do something about it. So what I'm seeing is a desperate need for people to find more intersections. You're out there a lot when you see those. There's a planning session out at North End. All of a sudden, all kinds of people you've never laid eyes on or haven't seen in years. That's what I really like. Is I go see people I haven't seen. People are longing for that because they're feeling their own loss of this community at the most basic grassroots level. So I'm seeing those things as really driving the need for more opportunities. Maybe not as much on the big scale. Back 15, 20 years ago, we were doing these big, all-day, plan the world meetings. I think those are a thing of the past, town halls. I think of them now as more neighborhood halls. And I see more now the opportunity to engage people in conversations that are already in intact groups. So rather than a call meeting, like call the world, come if you're interested in this, which there's still going to be plenty of because it's an old model and we're going to use it probably till we die. Being able to take a community issue or a neighborhood issue or any of those kinds of things and taking them to groups that are already there. Church groups, Boy Scouts, PTAs, book clubs, where people are already coming together, because what happens in the all-call meetings is the loudest voices come. And sometimes they're not the biggest stakeholders. Sometimes we lose the stakeholders in that. So I like getting close to the ground. When I was in politics, I used to love to go door to door. I really did. I to this day, it's such a joy to walk and talk, to people. And when I say close to the ground, it's like, where can I go find people that are in this and would have an opinion and would be with their friends so they can already have some dialogue basics built in to their relationship where we can have a conversation.
Many towns and cities in America are essentially managing over generations long-term economic decline. What you're suggesting is really we have the reverse. Everything that we're managing is really because of continued long-term growth patterns that are putting stresses on a community that has to evolve a leadership model that addresses far more complex, diverse, growing community.
The leadership model will have to look more diffused. And I think in a way, the most recent local elections have surfaced that. You've seen some very unusual, in a way, based on the old model, let's put it that way, suspects being elected. And I think that's part of that. I think it's part of people longing to see someone who they can relate to and they think understands their place, where they sit in the community at the table. And I think it's a good thing. I wish for all of those folks to be incredibly thoughtful and to allow themselves the space to be in the dialogue.
What do you mean by that, Cyndee?
I mean, when you run for office, you have to run with some certainty. You have to be able to speak like you actually know what you might want to do. And you might actually think you know what you want to do. I advise people that come to me and ask me, because sometimes they do, I always say, you should go meet with every department head of city, county, whatever it is that you're running for, and ask them what's on their priority list. What are the things they're concerned about? What are the initiatives they're about in their department? And try to just get a basic understanding of how the train fits together, where the tracks might be going. And then, one, you're smarter, and two, then fit what you're thinking and feel how those things can fit together. This whole thing around dialogue is about taking the time to have conversation and to ask deep questions. And I think sometimes the political world of today asks people to be certain and to commit and never to say, I'm not sure yet. I need more information. That is not a good thing for the community or for those individuals. They're going to get hung. You want to commit. A constituency comes to you and you recognize their issue and you recognize the problem, but you don't know what you don't know. So I always say to people, you have really helped me understand this more deeply. I want to go do some more of my own homework. That's okay. And I don't like to commit before I have all the information, but would you be willing for me to call you and ask you more questions? And you're free to always call me back. I feel like we're rushing to almost some sense of having to make a quick decision. And quick decisions, I call them ready, fire, aim. It's not the best.
Cyndee, the Knight Foundation recently issued a report entitled Charting the Civic Landscape. They identified a segment of the population called interested bystanders, people who pay attention to the issues around them but are not acting on those issues. 45% of those who responded to the survey identified themselves as interested bystanders. And they identified lack of trust as a major barrier to making civic life more meaningful and inclusive. What do you make of that?
I believe it's true. I think lack of trust, borne out by the fact that people feel that they observe. These bystanders watch on the national, state, local level. People say X and do Y. So an old thing that we say in our business is watch people's feet, and bystanders watch people's feet. They hear politicians come over to their side of town, or they hear leadership from this or that come to their side of town and say X, and then they watch. And so they're pretty aware that some people deliver and some people don't. And so they're hesitant to trust that change is going to come. What happened with the uprising in Charlotte was that. It is so in the ground, and it's not just in Charlotte. The sense of isolation, the sense of the doors aren't open for me to be part of things that impact my life, the sense that people who appear to be in the leadership roles or in the decision-making roles have no sense of what my life really looks like and what my struggles really are is deep. It's really deep. And it's systemic. So systems continue to operate in the way they always have. And we eat around the edges. We have community-based policing. We have neighborhood meetings. We do all these things, but we're around the edges of what's really impacting people's lives. And when you look at the economic demographics of America today, all you can see is that the majority of people are struggling. And when you have to struggle day to day, you can't be more than a bystander. And I promise you have no trust for the system.
What is that core issue then that we need to get at to more fundamentally address these systemic issues of inequality?
Inequality. You said the word. We have systemic inequality in America based on race and ethnicity and economics. And they run together. You can hardly peel them apart. Yes, there are groups of people who have moved past where they began in life, financially, economically, but it's still somewhat an anomaly unless they happen to be white. And that sense of an unlevel playing field forever and ever still being in the ground means that you're excluding a huge percentage of the people who are not going to engage and move off of the stands onto the playing field to help solve problems.
What can we do to improve civic engagement?
Go where people are. Don't ask them to come to you. Don't ask them to come down to City Hall. Go where they are. People are at places. Ask workplaces to give you time to run a focus group with a department. There are many, many places you can go and just ask questions and listen. Don't bring people solutions. I mean, we're doing some really good work, so don't misunderstand me. The work that we're doing around increasing the number of housing units is critically important. It's still a drop in the bucket. It's still pretty hard to be creative for a myriad of reasons. But people, again, are going to watch. So we better damn well deliver. There's no easy answers.
Cyndee, the Lee Institute says it holds the process for community building work. How does it hold the process?
Well, as I said, we design processes to get the most inclusion we can get, to hold the container and the space for people to have a dialogue, for people to be able to listen to one another. It doesn't always work. We sometimes do a little bit, refine, do a little bit, refine. In any project, we've been holding the container for the West Boulevard Coalition for about 3 years now. And we've helped this group of community leaders build their own organization. We didn't build their organization. What we did is help them figure out the things they needed to do, figure out how to have the dynamics work for them in the room, how to create their own leadership. And so they have to learn their own stuff. All you can do is provide the space and opportunity for it to happen. And that's what we're uniquely good at. And that's what we uniquely love to do. Things like that across communities are going to be, in my mind, what will impact systems change over time. The stronger and stronger voices coming from all corners of the community.
Cyndee, you grew up in Miami.
Mm-hmm.
Where in Miami?
Miami, Carroll City. Carroll City is northwest side of town. So Carroll City is the poor side of town. I moved when I was 5 into a new, sort of like almost like a Levittown kind of housing development, all white people. And by the time I was in junior high school, it was an integrated neighborhood, which in the 60s was a big deal. It was a gift to me. You know, when I think about things that framed your life, going to a high school that was probably almost 40% African American, lots of Hispanic, obviously, and white kids, and had a huge wing, 2 wings of vocational training. You know, I was the minority kid who went to college, but it gave me different grounding than if I'd grown up probably in another part of town. It was still paradise. Miami was still paradise to grow up in.
What did your mom and dad do?
My dad was an aircraft mechanic, a jet mechanic for Eastern Airlines. My mother worked for the YMCA and Sears. They divorced when I was about 12, so I had a slew of stepbrothers and sisters. So it was a crazy growing up, kind of. I had a stepfather. He read a lot, and he loved politics. So our dinner table conversations from the time I was about 13 until I was going to college were always about politics, and I was always loving that stuff.
What was formative about those years in Florida for you?
Well, when I had a lot of freedom. Parents then just kicked you out the door in the morning, and you had a lot of freedom. And I had a lot of diversity of everything. I mean, I was just kind of blessed in that way. And I got to grow up outdoors in a space that really was beautiful. And my parents had a very ugly divorce. That was kind of not a good thing. And yet, it makes you stronger. So it was what it was. They thought I was going to be a secretary. So they programmed me to be a secretary when you have to fill in your work plan for your 4 years of high school. And I decided I wasn't going to be a secretary. And my parents just said, oh, well, okay then, which is kind of nice. The fact that they actually didn't talk to each other meant no one was in charge. You could be in charge of yourself. But it was great. And then, I was always not sure I should have been in college when I got there, but I worked really hard. And, it was the 60s. I was a hippie. I went out on strike with my high school teachers when the school teachers went on strike for better pay. My father belonged to a union. These all now more and more frame who and where I sit today. It's very interesting how it all comes back around.
How so?
Well, because I think part of what's wrong with wages in America is there's no collective bargaining, and we beat that to death. It's unbelievable to me that you can't support your family and work 40 or 50 hours a week in America and any number of jobs. So I've kind of come full circle on all of this, is that somehow we need less at the top reward-wise and more at the bottom. And I think that now, when I think back on it, I think, well, yeah, of course you would get there. You grew up in that world. It's what I knew. I was against the war in Vietnam, but I married somebody in the military. I don't know, all kinds of crazy things happen to you. So it was a really rich time to be growing up and to have the breadth of options and choices that the generation before me didn't have. And with media at that time, it sounds like nothing, but you had radio and 3 television stations and newspapers, and you could see so much more of the world than you could have even 10 years ago. Those pictures coming back from Vietnam and the pictures coming from the protest in the South and the things I saw in Miami in protest, all of that framed probably why I love civic engagement. But people were really grappling with, oh my God, what's happened to our country? No matter which side of the issues you were on, you were still saying, I as a young person was saying, I was a product of John F. Kennedy's assassination. So my frame was, where is the country I thought I knew? And how do I rediscover America? So it's very funny. In my family, my sisters say to me, why are you the way you are? Meaning, why do I volunteer and why am I involved in the community when they aren't? My grandfather was a minister, so I just didn't fall off the turnip truck. But I am kind of an anomaly inside my sibling group. And I think part of it is that. I've always been a true believer in what the United States represents. I've been willing to work in my little piece of the world.
How did John Kennedy's assassination affect you?
Well, it was Camelot. It really was, in so many ways. And it said, even though I'd been through this awful divorce and messy thing with my family, it said that something horrible could happen in America. Listen, I'd been under my desk with bomb threats from Cuba, I intellectually knew it, but it hadn't been on the ground. I'd never seen anything on the ground in America that had scared me. And that was a moment where it just rocked my world that we could be so fragile. And then Martin Luther King came on the heels of that. It just kind of rolled down, you know what I mean? It did say to me, though, that if you want to see change and if you want to hold things together in the world you believe in, you better sign up, show up, and do your best.
Cyndee, you are 18 years old in 1968. How did that year affect you?
Well, of course, the death of Bobby Kennedy was awful. I can't, it just, it was really terrible. And I didn't know what to do then. And I was looking around thinking, who am I going to support for president? And because I didn't have good sense for many reasons, I was young, I thought that Hubert Humphrey was kind of like more of the same. And I was, as I already said, opposed to war. So I looked over at the Rockefeller side of life, the Republican side. My family was not partisan, so I didn't have like a partisan gene anywhere. So then, actually, the Republican convention was in Miami, so I worked at the convention. And of course, Rockefeller didn't win, and Nixon did. So I went off to Florida State, and I worked for Nixon, going door to door. And then Watergate rolled out, and I went, oh my God.
You just jumped 6 years.
But it started unraveling before the second. Now, you need to remember, before Nixon had been there his whole 4 years, pieces. One, the war wasn't going anywhere that he had promised to end. Number two, we started having these little funny things happening. The break-in, the Pentagon Papers. By the time it was time for Nixon to run again, my trust was broken. I said, I'm going to go back and work for the Democrats. And I've sort of stayed that way. Yeah, that was kind of another bat. That was actually, somebody being shot in America is pretty horrible. But having a president lie, cheat, manipulate, all those things, that was almost worse to me.
So you went from Bobby Kennedy to Nelson Rockefeller.
Richard Nixon.
To Richard Nixon to George McGovern.
Yeah. How does that happen? Yeah, it's kind of a crazy tale, isn't it? But I don't know. I really have loved politics all along the way. And you do find that people really are all human. We all have Achilles heels. So it's been a journey.
Cyndee, after high school, you did go to Florida State University. What did you study? How long were you there?
I was there 2 years. I started in sociology. I probably sort of stayed in sociology. I went off and moved to New York, worked for a management consulting firm, which was fun, got married, moved outside Chicago, decided to go back to school, went back to school at Purdue. And there I majored in psychology and business.
If I asked the 22-year-old Cyndee what she envisioned for herself, what would she have said?
You know, I'm not sure I had any clue at 22 years old. I was coming from a world that was so rapidly changing. Women's roles, let me speak specifically to that. Women's roles were so rapidly changing. Lots of people said I should go and be a school teacher. Well, one, I didn't have a natural inclination towards that anyway, and I wasn't that fond of small children. So I really didn't know. I thought at one point I just thought I'd be a sociologist, social worker or something, because it seemed like a giving profession. When I graduated from college, from Purdue, I started working on a master's and MBA. Didn't really light me up. I moved here, and I needed a job, so I went to work for Bank of America. I thought going back south would be a good idea. My mother had moved to Greenville when I was in college, South Carolina, so I knew this part of the world pretty well, and it seemed like an opportunity world. And so we moved here. The marriage didn't make it, but the place did. And what I saw in Charlotte, it's funny, we looked at 3 places, Birmingham, Richmond, and Charlotte. I picked Charlotte because it seemed the least Old South, the least first family-ish. And for a Miami girl that already talked too fast and had lived most of her life in the North or Miami, which is essentially the North, I needed a place that you could get engaged. And what I found here is that from the very beginnings, as I started to volunteer, that if you're willing to get engaged and get involved and roll up your sleeves, then it didn't matter where you came from.
What was your read of Charlotte in 1978 when you arrived?
They needed gateways at the airport so you didn't have to have an umbrella when it was pouring down rain to get to the plane. And they needed liquor by the drink desperately. So that was the very first thing I worked on when I came here, was the liquor by the drink campaign. I couldn't imagine as a single woman that I had to have a brown paper bag somewhere with a liquor bottle in it. So yeah, those 2 things were like, this is a nice town. It's a good town. People love this town. It's beautiful. It's got some good stuff going for it. And there's some real strange little things. But again, I was a big city girl. So those kind of, if I had to say the 2 things that popped out at me most were those 2 things. It's like, okay. I thought the energy was pretty amazing. Now, again, remember, I went to work at NCNB in the funds management group, which let me point out at that time had like 4 professional women in that whole landscape. And I knew Buddy Kemp, and I knew Hugh McCall. And I mean, everybody knew everybody. And these were dynamic, interesting human beings. And at that point, they weren't president of the bank yet. But, because funds management was a place that managed the bank's portfolio, Tom Storrs, all of these guys walked through, you knew them. You just knew them. So, and because I volunteered, I got to know other leaders. I got to know Rolf Neal. When I started Springfest, I met Bill Lee. I mean, all those people then later signed up when I said I wanted to run for office. I mean, Bill Lee was a Republican. I was a Democrat. He didn't care. He thought I was great. So I saw this town as open to newcomers, open to new ideas. I mean, can you imagine going pitching people that's before the Tryon Street Mall, so think about this. You'd have to look at old pictures. Narrow sidewalks, lots of boarded up storefronts, still had Belks and Ivies, and you were telling people you were going to do an art festival and close the streets for 3 days. And people didn't tell you were absolutely mad. They didn't. They said, well, good for you. What do you need? I mean, that's kind of cool. So that's what I loved about Charlotte, and I still do. I still think you can do that. You can come with a great idea, and Charlotte will say, okay, let's try it.
Cyndee, while you were at the bank, you did start volunteering. And over the next few years, in the early 1980s, you started Springfest and Jazz Fest and First Night. What were these initiatives?
Well, again, remember, I came from places that had things like this. And so I thought this was such a cool town, and the weather was so damn good here, that we ought to have things that brought people together, where people got to enjoy each other and love Center City. I thought it was a shame that Center City wasn't more alive. They just blown down the Independence building. Things were happening. They were going to do the Tryon Street Mall. I mean, all these things were happening. And I thought, this is such a great spot. And we just sort of act like downtown is not great. I always think it's the heart of whatever your city is that centerpiece. And so doing things there was fun for me. I love Jazz Charlotte the most of all my children, because I looked out at Fourth Ward Park the very first year, and sitting on the grass in Fourth Ward Park was the most diverse crowd of people in my previous 8-ish years in Charlotte I'd ever seen in one spot. And remember, I'd been working in politics. All ages, all races, all sexes, children, old people with white hair. Amazing. It was the most amazing thing. And I thought, this is good. This is just damn great.
Cyndee, those efforts did lead to politics. What happened?
Oh, I love politics. I like serving a lot. I was there at this most amazing time, too, because we were doing things that really were changing Charlotte. I ran in 85, so I served from December of 85 until December 93. I ran at large. I ran citywide. I served under 3 mayors, Harvey Gantt, Sue Myrick, and Richard Vinroot. And yes, I was at this moment, at the end of 93, I was really debating running for mayor. And I actually put together a committee, and we raised money, and I was running for mayor. And I came home night after night, as you would when you're starting to run for office, late. And my only child, who hadn't been all that easy to have or conceive, have late in life, was asleep on his pillow at the top of the stairs every night. And I said to myself, what are you doing? You made a conscious decision to be a mother. And, I took him lots of places with me, but it's just not the same. And actually, I was running against Pat McCrory. And I think I would have beat Pat. And it was hard to beat a Republican then. But I had to make that decision. So I withdrew from the race, sent back all the money, and said, I'm going to do this. This is my first thing. I need to do this first. And then I just never got back to it.
How old was your son at the time?
So he was 6.
Cyndee, here you are running for office. You have a 6-year-old. You make this decision to withdraw from the race. You must think about it a lot.
I don't think about it a lot. I think about it when I'm frustrated with what's going on in the world. And I think that I would probably either be retired from another elected office or still be in elected office. It's very interesting, though. I always thought back about it. At the time, I didn't have other than being mayor of Charlotte, there really wasn't anything I wanted to do, because this is my place. This is what I love. I'm not sure I would have wanted to run for governor. I probably might have wanted to go to Congress. But at the time, my view was really this ground and making this place the best it could be, because that's what my passion was. But yeah, I sometimes think about it. What would be different? And I sometimes get accused by my friends of making the mess that got made by the former governor. Which I say to them, no, you can't put that on me.
Well, Cyndee, were you frustrated that you had to make a choice between family and career as a woman running for office?
I knew that I couldn't juggle all the balls. So let's be clear. The mayor's job is not a full-time job, and I had a full-time job. I had 3 things going on. I had a company that was doing pretty well. I had a son, and I had politics. If you excluded family time, I'm still in a 60, 70-hour week situation, and mothers kind of make the nest. And I wasn't sure I could do it all. And as I said, having a child was not easy. And so it was really important to me that I get that part right. I mean, that's the legacy. The legacy wouldn't have been me being mayor. The legacy is the person who fills my shoes. And I'm pretty proud of that legacy, by the way.
Tell me about Hank today.
He works for East Coast Entertainment. He's an entertainment agent. He's a gentrification kid. He lives in the neighborhood of Belmont. And he is an incredible human being. Incredible human being.
Cyndee, you've seen a generation of civic leaders come and go in Charlotte. How would you assess civic leadership today versus the civic leadership of the mid-1980s and early 1990s?
I would say in the 80s, you got to leadership in pretty much one or two, three ways. One, you were head of a corporation. Two, you had the money to play. Or three, by some way, you figured out how to get elected and be at the table. Now, lots of more people can be at the table. The table's a bigger table. People can get there by being really smart and having creative ideas. They can get there by being elected. They can get elected when it might have been harder for them to get elected 15 years ago because it was more inside leadership game, Charlotte, in the old days. There are a lot of corporate people not at the table. So the town is driven very differently. So I see it as more diffused, which when people get frustrated at task force and things, they ought to understand that leadership's more diffused. There's nobody saying, okay, I got it, I'm taking it, I'm going to make it happen. And that's both good and bad. I think the important thing is for leaders today to recognize that's who and where they are and to figure out how to continue to advance conversations and the dialogue and how to decide where accountability can be had and where you can change systems.
Is the city today what you thought it would be when you were younger?
It's so much more. And I mean that both positively and negatively, but mostly positively. I'm pretty gung-ho Charlotte. Always have been. You know, with a city this size, the growing pains are always really painful. And that diversity of leadership is painful. It's all good. But again, there's nobody to point to and say, who's the quarterback here? And so those kind of things we have to grow with ourselves on, and we have to figure out how to be very thoughtful and ask a lot of questions and be very intentional about the things we do. Because if you make decisions now, it's pretty hard to unwind them. When you're this size and this big, even small decisions, it's hard to pull them back if they're not well thought through. Unintended consequences matter more and more the bigger you are.
Cyndee, why do you do what you do?
You know, it's funny, Mark, not a lot of people know this, but I converted about 5 years ago to Judaism. And people really quiz me about that, you can imagine, because I grew up Lutheran and my grandfather was a minister. But part of the reason that happened to me, I think, is I've always had this core belief that you really are responsible to leave this at least as good as you found it and preferably better. And that's an obligation that's on each of us as citizens of this world. And so it's deep in my core religious beliefs, and I never was captured somehow, which I don't know why, with the how you get to heaven, not going to, none of that has ever mattered to me. And so being a Reformed Jew, I don't have to worry about any of that. What I have to worry about is living the best life now in service to the community and others. That's basically the core belief of a Reformed Jew. Why I do these things has always been sort of the same answer. That's sort of my answer. And I guess as I've gotten older, I'm a little more spiritual or wanting a home spiritually. But I really do think that people that share a belief that it's on all of us, whether it's the environment or whether it's living wage or any of the, I call them fairness issues, that if there are enough of us like-minded like that we actually are the lever to move the stone.
Cyndee, later in life, you converted to Reform Judaism. How did that come about?
Well, it's interesting. I was doing the nonprofit work I do with a lot of the organizations on Shalom Park, one of which was Temple Beth El. As we talked about, I grew up in Miami, so I grew up with many, many, many friends, boyfriends who were Jewish. And so I had already had, actually my best friend, maid of honor, my wedding, converted to Judaism. So I always had a deep understanding at some level of the religion. And as I was doing the work on campus, on Shalom Park campus, I had lots of meetings with Judy Schindler, who you know is very inspirational. And I said to her, has anybody ever told you they thought they should have been Jewish? And she said, oh, yeah. And I said, well, what do you do with that? And she said, well, interesting you should ask. And there was a 4-week course starting on what does it mean to be Jewish. So I went to the course and I said, you know, the philosophy of this religion most closely matches who I am and where I sit. So I started on a journey, and it is a journey if you want to convert. It's at least a year worth of classes every Saturday morning. I'd already been to Israel once. I went again on an interfaith trip. I did a lot of things to say, is this something you really want to do, or can you just stay in the space you're in? I had not rejected religion, that wouldn't be right. I had a minister tell me when I was still practicing Lutheran that I needed to be in church with a fellowship of souls to be able to talk to God. And I just looked at him and said, I've been dialing direct all my life, and that doesn't jive with my relationship with God. So I've always had a relationship with God. And suddenly I found in Judaism a relationship that was a relationship like I had. I didn't have go-betweens, no intermediaries, just me, God, and how I live my life in a way that I feel advances good for people that I'm in contact with, my family, friends, and loved ones. So it just sort of kept rolling along, and I converted, and I've been amazingly happy. Sounds crazy, but to me, to go to temple on Friday night and celebrate Shabbat and coming up Shabbat and stop the week, it's like my stop the madness moment, to sit in peace and quiet on a Friday and let the week go away and enter back, remind myself that a lot of what I'm doing is the hamster wheel, and to kind of keep 2 or 3 things above the hamster wheel level in my mind is a good thing for me, because I tend to be a doer. So it's given me a little balance, and it's been a gift, a true gift to me.
Cyndee, there is a sign in your office, and I'm wondering if you might read it and tell me what it means to you.
It says, infinite gratitude towards all things past, infinite service to all things present, and infinite responsibility towards all things future. And it's a Zen Buddhism maxim. It means to me how I feel I should live my life. So I said something earlier about context matters. So that's the historic part. So you really have to know where you came from and where the people around you came from. And I try to show up and do my best in the everyday world. And I want to make sure the things I do now take into account what I'm leaving for the future, for the citizens of this community, for my son and my grandchildren. But I think part of it is doing the best you can to help people be able to live their best life now. So that's sort of how I live my life.
Thank you for your time today, Cyndee.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Cyndee Patterson is president of the Lynwood Foundation. She earned a BA with honors in psychology and business administration from Purdue University. And now, a personal word. Cyndee Patterson grew up in Carroll City, a blue-collar, working-class neighborhood of Miami Gardens, northwest of the city of Miami. When Cyndee was a teenager, much of Carroll City included farmland. It soon attracted public housing. White flight followed. The neighborhood became predominantly black, Hispanic, and poor. Crime statistics soared, and underclass solidified. Carroll City would become one of the most underprivileged places in greater Miami to live. Cyndee left Carroll City in 1968. I arrived in Miami in 1974. My family had lived in Brazil for 2 years and returned to the United States. I was 12 years old. My dad had to start his business from scratch and didn't have much money. My parents rented a house in Morningside, at the time a forlorn neighborhood just north of downtown Miami. Our house was a couple of blocks from a rough patch of Biscayne Boulevard, dotted with run-down motels. I would ride the city bus alone as a preteen, and more than once every kind of sex offender had me in their sights. Yes, it was a different time. I was able to fend predators away. Within a year, we moved about 30 streets north, past 79th Street, a major commercial artery that changed its name to the JFK Causeway as it crossed into the wealthy and exclusive North Bay Village on its way to North Beach. My sisters would take me to Baskin-Robbins at the 79th Street Shopping Center, a collection of down-market stores that would go into decline. My dad's one-man business as an importer-exporter eventually improved. We moved again as my parents sought a safer and more stable place for us to live. My dad was able to buy a small home on 103rd Street in Miami Shores, a middle-class bedroom community. That's where I spent my junior high and high school years. Here is what I remember about Miami at the time. It was a crazy place to live. Neighborhoods were either completely segregated or a complete mashup of every ethnicity in the world. New residents and immigrants were pouring in. Politics were corrupt. There were stark divides between wealth and poverty. And every night on the local news, the most spectacular and bloodthirsty crimes were reported like the weather. In May 1980, when I was a junior in high school, an all-white jury acquitted 5 Miami police officers of the murder of a black insurance agent named Arthur McDuffie. It was the latest of a number of police killings of black citizens. Years of resentment about racial oppression broke loose. The city went up in flames. Over 3 nights, 18 people died, 400 people were treated for severe injuries, 71 businesses were destroyed, 3,000 people lost jobs, and over $100 million in property damage claimed. Violent civil disturbances broke out again in Miami in 1982 and 1984. I was away at college at the time. Miami Vice debuted on network television, documenting the drug wars that were further tearing the city apart. I would go on to live in Boston, Houston, Orlando, Tallahassee, and Washington, D.C., before living again in Miami and Fort Lauderdale during the 1990s. Our lived experience shapes how we view a city. Who we are and what we know attract us to place. Cyndee would find her way to Charlotte in 1978. I would find my way to Charlotte in 1999. I suspect we both encountered a city that seemed so wide open and inviting relative to places we had been. When my wife and I arrived in Charlotte, we were struck by the clean and modern skyline, far from filled in, but bursting with plans. The decency of its people, respect for law and order, values of family, faith, and prosperity, and raw ambition. Charlotte wanted to make more of itself, and it welcomed newcomers who rolled up their sleeves. The narrative of a city matters. It determines what happens and how we feel about it. I heard about the Charlotte Way, the code of the city that got things done. Think big, unite public and private interests, invest, and do. It is a code that is attractive to bold thinkers and those who want to serve. There is a Mount Rushmore of people who, in my mind, represent the Charlotte Way. Hugh McCall Jr., Harvey Gantt, Michael Marsicano, and Cyndee Patterson. Cyndee has devoted herself over a 40-year career to countless initiatives, large and small, to create a more vital and inclusive city. I know that other people in Charlotte have a different lived experience of the city. I know that the Charlotte Way means something entirely different to them: exclusion, privilege, institutional power, and other very real grievances. I know how I am perceived and received because of my identity, and what I do is different than how other people are treated in Charlotte. There is much in the ground that is cause for civil disturbance. But any fair reading of the city is that we are making progress, that with promise and pragmatism, sometimes belatedly and begrudgingly, the city is addressing issues of equity and access. Cyndee Patterson and people of goodwill are making the city one of the great places to live. This is Mark Paris, and you've been listening to On Life and Meaning. Additional support for this podcast is provided by the UNC College of Arts and Architecture, celebrating a decade of creative education in the arts and design. Thank you to our funding partners and to my teammates Andy Go, producer of the show, and to Chris Curriton, art and media director. This is how you can help. Please write a review on iTunes. It helps us grow our audience. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And become a patron. We are on Patreon, a crowdsourcing platform that allows you to support what you value at a level you choose. Visit us also on our website on lifeandmeaning.com. Thank you for listening.